What would you do if someone humiliated you in front of your child and the world was watching? Would you fight back in anger, or stand so calm that even your silence spoke louder than words? On a quiet morning flight from Dallas to New York, a single mother sat in first class, holding her daughter's tiny hand. She looked ordinary tired eyes, gentle smile, a mother just trying to get home. No one knew she was one of the most powerful women in the country. But when a flight attendant lost her temper, when a slap broke the stillness of the cabin, a choice was made that would shake an entire industry. If it were you alone, humiliated, your child staring up at you, would you seek revenge or justice? This is not just a story about money or power. It's about dignity, about how one act of cruelty revealed the quiet strength of a woman who refused to break. Stay with us, because what happens next will make you question what true power really looks like. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. The cabin lights shimmered with a soft golden glow, reflecting off polished wood and brushed metal. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny stars, and the faint hum of the engines gave everything a steady rhythm. First class on Liberty Air Flight 782 was designed to feel more like a private lounge than an airplane. Reclining leather seats, fine wines waiting on ice, menus embossed with silver lettering. But the quiet elegance cracked for just a moment when the cabin door opened, and a woman stepped in hand, with her little girl. Amara Collins walked with a calm, measured grace. She wore a simple navy cardigan, a white blouse, and jeans that had seen more school runs than cocktail parties. On her shoulder hung a large, worn leather tote. It was the kind of bag that carried coloring books, snacks, and maybe a folded-up blanket for emergencies. Next to her, 7-year-old Leah clutched a plush giraffe. The toy's fur rubbed thin from too many nights under the covers. For most passengers, Amara looked like any other tired single mom balancing life and travel. She did not fit the glossy magazine version of first-class elegance. But there was something else about her, an aura that settled in the quiet confidence of her stride. The way she scanned the room without flinching at the stairs. And there were stairs. A man in a tailored suit glanced up from his laptop, brows knitting as if to say. Her here two women whispering across the aisle paused mid-sentence, their eyes flicking toward Leah's stuffed giraffe as though it were out of place among their Louis Vuitton handbags. It was subtle, but heavy enough to notice. Amara squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "It's okay," she whispered. Her voice was steady, even warm. Leah nodded, her curls bouncing. "Mommy, are we sitting here?" she asked in a half-whisper, eyes wide at the oversized seats that looked more like recliners from a home theater. "Yes, baby," Amara replied softly. "This is where we belong." Her words weren't just to Leah. They were for herself, too. At the far end of the cabin, a flight attendant watched their approach. Victoria Hale was a woman who carried authority like armor. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her blonde hair wound tight in a neat chignon, her lips painted in a shade of red, sharp enough to cut. She had been with Liberty Air for 15 years and knew how to control a cabin with nothing but her posture. But now, her eyes narrowed. She didn't like what she saw. Her heels clicked as she stepped forward, blocking the aisle just before Amara and Leah reached their seats. Her smile was thin, brittle around the edges. "Excuse me, ma'am," Victoria said. Her tone was polite, but it carried an edge that wasn't meant to be missed. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers." Amara met her gaze, calm. She tilted her head just slightly. "Yes," she said. pulling 2 boarding passes from her tote. Seats 2A and 2B. Victoria barely looked at the passes before her eyes flicked back to Amara. Her smile didn't change, but her voice grew colder. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" "Sometimes. Mistakes happen with bookings." Around them, the air seemed to thicken. A man coughed into his hand. Someone shifted in their seat. Nobody spoke up. Leah pressed closer to her mother. Amara inhaled slowly, her fingers steady as she placed the passes into Victoria's hand. "No mistake," she said. "These are our seats." Victoria held the boarding passes for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to find a flaw written between the lines of ink. At last, she handed them back with a nod so tight it was almost a flinch. "Very well," she said. The word sounded like surrender, but her eyes promised something else. Amara guided Leah forward. She placed their tote under the seat, buckled her daughter in, and handed her the giraffe. Then she leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment. She had been through this before. Different airports, different faces, but always the same invisible weight pressing against her. That question, unsaid, but loud. "Do you belong here?" Leah tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, why did she talk to you like that?" Amara opened her eyes, softened her voice. "Sometimes people forget that respect is for everyone," she murmured. "But we don't forget." "Do we?" Leah shook her head. "Serious? No, we don't forget." Amara smiled, pressing a kiss to her daughter's curls. Meanwhile, just a few rows back, another pair of eyes had been watching. Ethan Brooks was a quiet man in his 50s, gray hair at his temples, a paperback tucked into the pocket of his blazer. He had seen enough in life to notice the subtle cruelties that others ignored. The whispers, the sharp glance from the attendant, the stiffness in the air. He didn't know who Amara was. He didn't know her story. But something about the way she carried herself dignified, unshaken, made him slip his phone from his pocket and set it face down on his tray table. Ready, just in case, because sometimes things escalated, and he had learned the hard way that it was better to be prepared. The seatbelt signs lit up, and the captain's voice filled the cabin with its practiced warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Liberty Air Flight 782 nonstop service from Los Angeles to New York. We're expecting smooth skies ahead. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The plane began to taxi, engines rumbling beneath the floor. Leah clapped her hands, giggling, the stuffed giraffe bouncing with excitement. Amara looked out the window, her reflection caught in the glass. The world was about to shrink to a steel tube flying at 35,000 feet, and inside it, there was no escape from the small battles that revealed themselves. She didn't know yet just how far this one would go, but she was ready, because she had lived a lifetime preparing for moments exactly like this. The plane had leveled out above the clouds, sunlight spilling through the oval windows in warm stripes across the cabin. For a brief moment, it looked peaceful. Passengers sipped champagne, unfolded newspapers, and tapped on laptops as if nothing unusual had happened when Amara and Leah took their seats. But peace in first class was fragile. It cracked easily under whispers. From across the aisle, a woman leaned toward her husband, her diamond earrings catching the light. "I don't think she belongs here," she murmured, low but not low enough. "Look at her bag. Look at the child. First class is supposed to be discreet." Her husband gave a noncommittal grunt, eyes still on his Wall Street Journal. But the glance he cast at Amara was sharp, disapproving. Leah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wasn't old enough to understand the subtleties of status, but she could feel when eyes lingered too long. when smiles never reached the eyes. She hugged her giraffe tighter and pressed into her mother's arm. Amara smoothed her daughter's hair, her expression serene. She had mastered this calm, the outward stillness that hid the currents inside. Yet behind her quiet gaze, she felt that old ache stir again, the question she'd carried through every boardroom where she'd been the only black woman at the table. The same question asked without words. Who let you in? Victoria Hale made another pass through the aisle, her heels clicking against the narrow floor. She stopped at Amara's row. Her lips curved into a smile that was all surface. "Can I take your drink order?" she asked, her tone sugar-sweet. "Yes," Amara replied evenly. "Just some water for my daughter. Please." Victoria arched a brow, eyes sweeping over Leah as though the child were out of place among the stemmed glassware. "We usually serve sparkling water or juice in first class," she said pointedly, as though the request were an inconvenience. "Plain water's fine," Amara said. Victoria's smile tightened. She turned sharply and disappeared behind the curtain. A moment later, she returned and set a glass down with a little too much force, spilling droplets onto the table. Leah flinched at the sound, her little hands gripping the giraffe tighter. "Careful," Amara murmured to her daughter, dabbing at the spill with a napkin. She didn't look up at Victoria, but Victoria wasn't done. "Just so you're aware," she said lightly, "sometimes families traveling together get seated incorrectly. If another passenger has a claim to this seat, you may have to relocate." The words were framed as information, but everyone within earshot heard the threat woven into them. Amara raised her eyes, calm but steady. "These are our seats. There will be no relocation." For a moment, the two women stared at each other, one with barely concealed contempt, the other with an unshakable stillness. It was Sophie Nguyen, the junior flight attendant, who broke the tension. She appeared behind Victoria, clutching a tray of glasses. Her dark eyes flicked nervously between them. "Victoria." "I'll take over the next section," she said softly, as if hoping to redirect. Victoria dismissed her with a wave. "Stay in your lane." "Sophie," she said. Then she moved down the aisle, her heels striking sharper than before. Sophie hesitated, then leaned closer to Amara. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. She isn't always like this." Amara studied her. The young woman's face was earnest, her accent touched with a trace of the Midwest. She looked like someone caught between duty and conscience. "You saw what happened," Amara said gently. "That's all that matters." Sophie's eyes flickered with guilt, and she moved away quickly, vanishing into the galley. Leah looked up, her voice small. "Mommy, why doesn't she like us?" Amara exhaled slowly. She wanted to protect her daughter from the weight of explanations far too heavy for a 7-year-old, but she also believed in truth, even softened for little ears. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people judge before they know someone's heart. That doesn't make them right. It just makes them small." Leah thought about that. Her little brow furrowed. Then she nodded firmly, as if memorizing the words. From the next row, Ethan Brooks caught the exchange. His phone rested ready on the tray again. Something told him that this wasn't the end of it. He had seen enough people in power misuse it to know when a storm was gathering, and the air in the cabin felt like thunder waiting to break. The hours stretched quietly. Dinner service began. Silverware clinked against china plates as attendants laid down meals with polished precision. Passengers leaned back with glasses of Bordeaux, their voices dropping into comfortable murmurs. But when Victoria reached Amara's row again, the mask slipped further. "We've unfortunately run out of the entree option you selected," she said, standing tall, chin tilted slightly. "I can offer you the lighter menu instead." Amara frowned. "I pre-ordered. It was confirmed." "Yes, but sometimes priorities shift," Victoria replied smoothly. She didn't explain what she meant, but her glance at the suited man across the aisle made it clear. He now had the entree Amara had chosen. Amara held her ground. "That's unacceptable. My meal was confirmed." Victoria's voice dropped a shade colder. "If you're not satisfied, I can arrange for you to have something from the coach menu." Gas rippled quietly through nearby seats. A passenger whispered, "Coach menu, in first class." The cruelty was sharp enough that even those who weren't inclined to notice before could feel the sting now. Leah's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Mommy, please don't fight." Amara laid her hand over her daughter's. Her voice was calm, measured, but every word cut like glass. "My daughter doesn't need to watch her mother disrespected. You will bring the meal I ordered, or you will explain to the captain why you denied service." "For the first time," Victoria faltered. The calm steel in Amara's voice wasn't defiance, it was authority, quiet and absolute. But instead of retreating, Victoria leaned closer, her whisper a hiss. "You don't belong here, and sooner or later, everyone will see it." The words slithered between them like poison. Then she pulled back, plastered on her brittle smile again, and moved on to the next passenger. Amara sat back, her jaw tight but her face composed. She pressed another kiss to Leah's hair, as if sealing the promise she'd made before. "This is where we belong." And as the engines roared softly beneath them, she felt the storm gathering closer. Not yet the slap, not yet the breaking point, but every second in that cabin was winding tighter, like a string pulled to its limit. Soon, it would snap. The night sky stretched endless outside the cabin windows, pinpricked with stars. The cabin lights had dimmed, creating a hush of comfort meant for rest. But Amara could feel the tension still pulsing under the surface, like static waiting to spark. Leah had drifted to sleep against her side, her tiny hand curled around the giraffe, chest rising and falling in the innocent rhythm of childhood. Amara sat upright, eyes half closed, but her mind sharp. Victoria Hale's voice returned like an unwelcome echo. She stopped beside Amara's row, her presence cutting into the fragile peace. "Mrs. Collins," she said, voice laced with fake warmth. "There seems to have been a mistake." Amara opened her eyes. What kind of mistake? Victoria's smile was cold. "These seats. I'm afraid they may have been assigned incorrectly. There is a platinum elite passenger who has requested them. You and your daughter will need to relocate." Amara's brows lifted slightly. "Relocate to where?" "To a pair of seats at the back of the aircraft." "Still comfortable, of course, though not in this section," Victoria answered smoothly, as though offering a favor. Amara's calmness was like a wall she had spent her whole life building. "No," she said simply. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me." "No," Amara repeated. "We purchased these seats. We boarded with confirmation. We will not be moving." Her voice was low but firm, carrying a power that silenced the murmurs around them. Passengers nearby shifted in their chairs, uneasy, yet drawn to the quiet confrontation. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I think you should reconsider. For your own comfort." Ethan Brooks had been listening. He reached slowly for his phone again, thumb hovering near the record button. Something in his gut told him This was the moment things would crack wide open. Amara glanced at Leah, sleeping soundly, oblivious to the storm unfolding. Her hand tightened gently over her daughter's. Then she looked back up at Victoria. "My comfort doesn't depend on your permission," she said. Victoria's mask slipped, only for a moment. A flash of something bitter crossed her face. She straightened her shoulders, raised her chin. "If you choose not to cooperate, I'll have to escalate this to the captain. And he may have you removed at the next stop." Leah stirred faintly, opening her eyes, blinking against the dim light. "Mommy," she whispered. Amara soothed her daughter with a touch, then turned her eyes back to the woman looming over her. "You may escalate to whomever you like. We are not moving." The words carried finality, but Victoria didn't retreat. Instead, she leaned down, her whisper sharp as a knife. "You should remember your place. Passengers like you are only tolerated here when we allow it." Ethan's thumb tapped the record button. The phone's screen glowed faintly as the camera captured every word. Across the aisle, the man in the tailored suit raised his brows, uncomfortable now, perhaps realizing that what had been subtle was no longer deniable. A few seats back, another passenger craned to see. The quiet drama had become the cabin's secret theater. Sophie Nguyen appeared again, stepping nervously into the aisle, holding a tray. Her eyes widened as she heard the words. She froze, caught between fear of her superior and her own conscience. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then she lowered her gaze and turned back to the galley, the weight of her silence heavy in the air. Victoria straightened once more, her smile snapping back into place. "Very well," she said, "but don't say you weren't warned." She swept away, heels clicking, her perfume lingering like smoke. Amara leaned back slowly, exhaling through her nose. She pressed her lips to Leah's hair again, grounding herself in the softness of her daughter's curls. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart," she whispered. Leah nodded, half asleep, and nestled closer. But Amara didn't close her eyes. She stared straight ahead, steady, her mind echoing with a lifetime of memories. Boardrooms where her voice had been talked over, deals where her ideas had been credited to others, airports where she'd been asked if she was in the right line. 100 moments that told her she didn't belong. But she did. And tonight, no one, not even Victoria Hale, would take that truth away from her or from her daughter. The cabin hummed quietly, the engine steady. Passengers shifted, whispered, glanced sideways. Ethan's phone remained steady in his hand, recording still, and somewhere inside Amara, a steel thread wound tighter. She knew this wasn't over. The slap had not come yet. But she could feel it in the air, the moment of breaking that always arrives when power collides with dignity. And when it came, she would not shatter. She would rise. The hours crept forward, the plane slicing smoothly through the night. Most of the passengers had sunk into silence, half asleep in their seats, but the tension between Amara and Victoria hadn't faded. It had only shifted, like a storm cloud hovering just beyond the horizon. The air was too thick, too charged, for anyone to pretend they didn't feel it. Amara sat upright, her hand resting lightly on Leah's shoulder as her daughter slept once more. She had closed her eyes, but her mind was restless, rehearsing and replaying every word that had been said. For a woman who had built an empire from nothing, she had long ago learned the art of patience. But patience did not mean silence. Patience was simply the pause before action. Victoria Hale reappeared, her posture rigid, her eyes gleaming with something sharper than professionalism. She had been waiting too, waiting for the moment to push again. She approached Amara's row carrying a tray. Her smile sharpened into something that didn't reach her eyes. "I've brought something for you," she said with mock sweetness. She set down a plate with a cold sandwich, the kind served in economy, wrapped in plastic and placed carelessly on the linen table. "It's not on the first-class menu, but I thought it might be more fitting." Gasps rose around them. Even those who had been pretending not to notice couldn't ignore this. Ethan Brooks leaned forward in his seat, angling his phone just slightly, the camera catching every detail. Amara opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the sandwich, then up at Victoria. Her expression did not change, but her silence spoke louder than outrage. Leah stirred again, blinking awake, confusion clouding her small face. "Mommy, is that our dinner?" Amara smoothed her daughter's curls. "No, sweetheart, that's not ours." Victoria's smile tightened. "It's either this or nothing. Perhaps you'll be more comfortable with simpler service." The words sliced through the cabin. A murmur ran among the passengers. Some looked away, ashamed to be caught watching, while others shifted with unease, realizing how far this had gone. Amara's voice was calm, deliberate. "You've already made your position clear, Miss Hale, and I've made mine." Her restraint was infuriating. Victoria's smile faltered. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "You don't intimidate me. You can sit here pretending to be above it all. But to me, you're just another passenger who doesn't belong. And sooner or later, someone will put you back where you belong." Amara's gaze didn't flicker. She reached for Leah's blanket, tucking it around her daughter's shoulders. Then, as if the whisper hadn't cut, she spoke clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Respect is not given by permission. It's claimed by presence." The sentence hung in the air, almost lyrical in its truth. Ethan, behind his phone, felt something shift inside him, admiration, anger, awe, all twined together. Victoria straightened, her composure cracking, her cheeks flushed red. "We'll see how much presence matters when the captain hears about your refusal to cooperate," she spat, before spinning on her heel and storming down the aisle. The hush that followed was deafening. No one moved for a moment. Then, as though on cue, passengers began whispering again, this time not in judgment, but in unease, their glances sharp with recognition. The mask had slipped too far. Everyone had seen it now. Sophie Nguyen emerged quietly from the galley, her face pale. She paused near Amara's row, her hands trembling as she adjusted a stack of trays that didn't need adjusting. "Finally," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier." Amara looked at her, her voice gentle but firm. "The moment for silence has passed. Sophie, next time, use your voice." Sophie's eyes filled with shame, but also with resolve. She nodded once before hurrying away, her back straightened as though a weight had lifted. Leah, now fully awake, whispered, "Mommy, why is she so mean?" Amara brushed her cheek, her tone tender. "Because some people think kindness is a choice instead of a duty. But we'll show them, won't we?" Leah nodded, though confusion lingered in her small eyes. Ethan leaned forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Ma'am," he said softly, "everything she said, everything she's done, it's on video now. The world will see." Amara turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes with calm gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight, his resolve strengthening. The engines hummed, steady and relentless, carrying them eastward through the night. But inside the cabin, the current had shifted. The passengers were no longer blind. They had seen the hostility laid bare, the cruelty dressed as service, the quiet dignity standing firm against it, and Amara knew the breaking point was close. The slap hadn't come yet, but the air was thick with its promise. The minutes ticked by with unbearable slowness. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin it felt like the silence was strung too tight, ready to snap. Amara sat with her hands folded loosely on her lap, her eyes calm, her face serene, though the storm gathering around her was impossible to ignore. Leah leaned into her side, awake again, her small voice whispering questions that Amara answered with soft touches more than words. Victoria Hale returned, her step sharp, her posture radiating determination. It was clear to anyone watching that she hadn't let go of the confrontation. If anything, she had nursed it into something hotter, more dangerous. She stopped abruptly in front of Amara's row, her voice low but edged with steel. "Mrs. Collins," she began, "I've informed the captain of your refusal to comply with seating adjustments and meal accommodations. If you continue to be uncooperative, I will have no choice but to escalate further. Do you understand?" Amara's gaze lifted, level and steady. "I understand that my daughter and I are entitled to the seats we purchased and the service we were promised. I understand that you have chosen to treat us differently, and I understand that this has gone far enough." The words were measured, but they struck like thunder. A ripple of unease moved through the surrounding rows. Ethan Brooks, phone still recording on his lap, could feel his heartbeat quicken. Passengers shifted, some leaning forward, others turning their faces away, unwilling to admit how much they wanted to see what would happen next. Victoria's mask cracked. "Enough," she repeated, her voice climbing. "You think you can dictate how things are done on my flight." "Your flight." Amara's tone was quiet, almost gentle. "I was under the impression this was Liberty Air's flight, and as far as I know, they value every paying passenger." The exchange cut through the air like a blade. Victoria's cheeks flushed crimson. Her hand trembled as she set it on the seat in front of her, as though steadying herself. She leaned closer, her whisper so sharp it carried anyway. "Don't act like you're special. You're not. You're just another woman out of place, dragging her child where she doesn't belong." Leah whimpered softly, clutching at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, please." And that was when it happened. In a burst of frustration, Victoria lifted her hand and struck Amara across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin, sharp and unmistakable. Gas erupted. A woman down the aisle cried out in shock. Leah screamed, her little arms wrapping around her mother's waist as tears burst from her eyes. Ethan's phone captured everything: the motion, the sound, the stunned silence that followed. Amara didn't move at first. Her head had turned slightly from the force of the blow, but she sat perfectly still, her breathing even, her eyes closed for the briefest moment. Then she turned her face back, slowly, her gaze locking onto Victoria's. Her calm was unshaken. "Are you finished?" Amara asked quietly. The words chilled the entire cabin. They weren't shouted. They weren't angry, but they carried a weight heavier than fury. Victoria stepped back, her chest rising and falling quickly, as if even she didn't fully realize what she had done until that moment. Her hand hovered in the air, then dropped to her side. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Leah sobbed against her mother. Amara stroked her daughter's back, her eyes never leaving the woman who had struck her. "It's all right, baby," she whispered softly. "I'm here. Nothing will harm you." The hush broke into murmurs, then voices. "Did she just hit her? I saw it. This is unbelievable." Passengers twisted in their seats, some lifting phones of their own, recording what had already become undeniable. Ethan finally spoke, his voice ringing through the cabin. "I have it all on video," he said loudly. "Every word, every second. The world is going to see this." Victoria's face drained of color for the first time. She looked uncertain, even afraid, but still, she tried to gather her composure. She was being uncooperative. "No." Ethan cut her off. His voice was hard. "That was assault, plain and simple, and you know it." Sophie Nguyen appeared from the galley, her face pale with shock. She looked from Amara to Victoria, her voice trembling. "Victoria, what did you do? You can't stay out of this." "Sophie," Victoria snapped, but her authority no longer held. It shattered under the weight of what had just happened. Amara rose slowly from her seat, easing Leah into the chair with care. Her movements were graceful, deliberate. She stood eye to eye with Victoria, her voice steady and unwavering. "You struck me in front of my child," Amara said. "You humiliated us, denied us, and threatened us. And now you will face the consequences." Passengers were silent, watching, caught in the gravity of the moment. Victoria tried to summon her old confidence, but it faltered. "You don't have the authority," before she could finish. A new voice cut through the cabin. It was deep, commanding, the voice of someone who carried real authority. Enough. Captain Michael Torres stood at the front of the cabin, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He had left the cockpit, a move so rare that it carried instant weight. His eyes swept over the scene, the trembling child, the composed mother, the ashen attendant. "I heard enough from the cockpit," Torres said, his voice steady, "and I saw enough just now." Victoria froze. "Captain," she... "Silence," Torres commanded. "You've disgraced this airline, endangered this flight, and assaulted a passenger. You are relieved of duty immediately." The cabin erupted in murmurs again, louder this time, a rush of voices filled with outrage and relief. Leah clutched her mother's hand, her tears slowing as she looked up at the man who had spoken with such finality. Amara lowered her eyes to her daughter, her voice soft once more. "See, baby respect will always find its voice." And though the night sky outside remained endless and dark, inside the cabin a spark had been lit, one that would not be put out. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from tense to electric. It felt like every passenger had suddenly become part of something far larger than themselves, witnesses to a moment that would not easily be forgotten. The hush following Captain Torres' command carried the weight of judgment, a collective understanding that a line had been crossed that could never be undone. Victoria stood frozen, her hand still trembling at her side. The arrogance that had fueled her for hours seemed to drain from her body, replaced by the dawning realization that this was not going to be swept under the rug. Her eyes darted toward the cockpit as though some invisible authority might still shield her. But no one came. Amara lowered herself back into her seat, gathering Leah into her arms, pressing a kiss against her temple. Her composure was so steady that it almost startled those around her. Most people would have been shouting by now, demanding retribution. But she radiated something deeper, an unshakable certainty that truth had already spoken louder than rage ever could. Ethan adjusted his phone, saving the video securely, his heart pounding. He wasn't the kind of man who usually sought confrontation. but even he could feel the gravity of what he held in his hand. This wasn't just footage, it was evidence, a story, a symbol. He looked toward Amara, quietly admiring the restraint she carried, the strength she held without raising her voice. Across the aisle, an older woman cleared her throat, her voice trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've flown Liberty Air for 30 years, she said, her southern accent warm but edged with conviction, and I have never seen anything so shameful. Her words unlocked something in the cabin. Other passengers began murmuring, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones to share what they had seen. The balance of silence had been broken. The passengers, who once sat in the uneasy comfort of detachment, were now part of the reckoning. Victoria spun toward them, her voice sharp, desperate. "You don't understand, she's been—" But the murmurs drowned her out. This time, the voices were not on her side. Sophie Nguyen, still pale, stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides, but her voice was clear. "Captain Torres, I witnessed everything." "Ms." Collins never raised her voice, never disobeyed a lawful order. She was treated unfairly from the moment she boarded. And then she hesitated, glancing at Amara, then back at Torres. And then Victoria struck her. "That is the truth." Torres gave a single nod, his eyes, cold and decisive, fixed on Victoria. "Go to the crew rest area. You will not serve another passenger on this flight." Victoria's chest heaved, her lips parting as though she wanted to protest. But one look at Torres' expression silenced her. She turned on her heel, walking stiffly down the aisle, each step echoing like a retreat. The cabin seemed to exhale all at once, relief mingled with disbelief. Some passengers leaned back, shaking their heads as though they couldn't believe they'd just seen what they had. Others glanced at Amara with something like respect, perhaps even awe. Leah sniffled against her mother's chest. "Mommy, is she gone?" "Yes, baby," Amara whispered, smoothing her curls again. "She's gone." But even as she said it, Amara knew this wasn't over. The calm that followed was deceptive. Conflict leaves ripples, and this one was far from finished. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but intent. "Mrs. Collins, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but who you are matters here. The world needs to know not just what happened, but who it happened to." Amara turned her head slowly toward him, her eyes thoughtful. "Who I am doesn't matter nearly as much as what was done. This could have been any woman, any mother." She paused, her gaze dropping briefly to Leah before lifting again. "But yes, the truth has a way of finding its voice." The way she said it, calm but layered with meaning, made Ethan wonder if there was something more, something about her identity that carried more weight than anyone suspected. The plane settled into uneasy silence once more. But it was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of people processing, remembering, deciding how they would carry this story when they landed. In the galley. Sophie's hands shook as she poured water into a cup. A fellow attendant whispered nervously beside her, "She's finished. Isn't she, Victoria? After this, she's done." Sophie set the cup down carefully. She chose her path. "But Mrs. Collins," she glanced toward the aisle. "She's different. There's something about her. Back in her seat." Amara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling Leah's weight against her. The sting of the slap still lingered on her skin, a dull throb. But it wasn't the pain that stayed with her, it was the knowledge that her daughter had seen it all. That was the wound that cut deepest. But Amara Collins was no stranger to wounds, and she knew some wounds could become a source of strength. Captain Torres returned to the cockpit, but not before one last glance at Amara. There was something unspoken in that look, an acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. The flight continued eastward, the stars gleaming cold and distant outside the windows. But inside, the storm had left its mark, and somewhere in the hush of the night sky, Amara knew the true reckoning hadn't even begun. The cabin lights had been dimmed, casting everything in a hushed glow of muted gold. Outside, the night stretched endless and black, the stars barely visible through the thick glass. Yet inside the aircraft, no one truly rested. Sleep felt impossible when the air was still vibrating with the aftermath of what had taken place. Amara sat with Leah curled against her side, the child's head heavy on her lap. Her daughter had finally fallen back asleep, her breathing steady but punctuated with occasional hiccups from earlier tears. Amara's hand brushed gently through her curls, a soothing rhythm that belied the storm still churning in her own chest. The sting on her cheek was faint now, fading into memory. What lingered sharper was the look on Leah's face when it happened, the fear, the confusion. That image cut deeper than any slap ever could. Around her, the cabin whispered. 2 rows ahead. Passengers leaned toward one another, voices hushed but urgent. Behind her, the glow of phones illuminated determined expressions. News was spreading in real time. Ethan Brooks had already uploaded his video, encrypted and time-stamped, sending it to multiple platforms before the Wi-Fi could falter. He hadn't said anything to Amara, but she noticed the way he clutched the device like a lifeline, as though he understood the gravity of what he had just released. Sophie Nguyen passed quietly down the aisle, offering water with trembling hands. She paused when she reached Amara's row, her eyes filled with an unspoken apology. She whispered, barely audible, "Thank you for not yelling at me earlier. You could have. You had every right." Amara looked up, her tone even. Courage doesn't always come when we want it to, but it came when it mattered. The words hit Sophie like a bomb and a burden all at once. She nodded quickly, retreating before her emotions could spill in front of the passengers. From the back, a new voice rose, a male passenger who hadn't spoken until now. "If this had happened to my wife," he said, his tone heavy, "I don't think I could have kept calm like that." Another voice answered, softer but certain. "That's because most people mistake anger for strength." "What she did?" The speaker gestured subtly toward Amara. "That's power." Amara pretended not to hear, her eyes fixed on the window where streaks of moonlight brushed across the wing. She didn't crave their praise. What she wanted was silence for Leah, safety for her child, and dignity restored not in words, but in actions. Still, a thought pressed itself into her mind. This wasn't over. Not here. Not when they landed. Not when the world caught wind of it. Captain Torres' voice crackled through the intercom, deep and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be continuing our flight path to New York as scheduled. Please know that the situation in the cabin has been addressed, and safety remains our highest priority." It was the kind of announcement meant to soothe. But beneath the surface, it only deepened the awareness that something extraordinary had unfolded tonight. Ethan unbuckled quietly and approached Amara's row, crouching down beside her. His voice was low, urgent, but respectful. "Mrs. Collins, I need to ask when this goes public. Do you want me to release your name? People will want to know who you are." Amara met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. "Not yet. The story is not about me. It's about what was done." Ethan nodded slowly, but the question lingered. He suspected there was more to her identity than she let on, something heavier than her calm voice suggested. In first class, identities were currency, but Amara seemed to carry hers like a sealed vault. Leah stirred again, murmuring in her sleep, and Amara brushed her hair back tenderly. Her mind, however, was far from rest. She remembered boardrooms where men twice her age had dismissed her ideas until her company overtook theirs. She remembered handshakes that came reluctantly, contracts signed with veiled condescension. She remembered building everything she had so that her daughter would never feel less than in any room she entered. And now, here they were, treated as if they belonged nowhere at all. No, this wasn't over. From the galley, Sophie overheard Victoria's muffled voice. The disgraced attendant was on the satellite phone, whispering into the receiver with sharp words. Sophie caught fragments misunderstood. Difficult passenger. Exaggerating. Her stomach clenched. Even now, Victoria was trying to rewrite the story before it could reach the ground. Sophie took a step closer, only to retreat again, fear gnawing at her chest. Confronting Victoria head-on felt impossible, but she had already made one choice tonight to speak truth in front of the captain. Maybe she could make another. Quietly, she pulled out her own phone, recording the muffled conversation. Just in case. Back in the cabin, Amara adjusted Leah's blanket, her movements slow, deliberate. Ethan had returned to his seat, but not before giving her a look that carried more than words. Respect, solidarity, maybe even a vow to stand by her when the story broke wide. The engines droned on, a steady hum against the fragile stillness. Amara exhaled deeply, finally allowing herself to lean back into the seat. For now, the cabin was calm, though it was the kind of calm that comes after a storm when everyone waits to see if another wave will strike. Her cheek still tingled faintly where the slap had landed, but deeper than that, something stirred a resolve that had long lived within her, now awoken sharper than ever. Leah murmured again, her tiny voice soft. "Mommy, we're safe." "Right." Amara kissed her hair, whispering back, "Yes, baby, we're safe." But as she gazed out into the darkness beyond the window, she knew safety was never guaranteed. Not on the ground, not in the air, not even in the places money was supposed to protect you. What mattered was standing firm when others tried to strip it away. Her fingers tightened gently around Leah's small hand. She had been calm tonight. She had been patient. But when they landed, she would not remain silent. Not this time, because some truths weren't meant to be whispered. They were meant to be declared. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in pale streaks of orange and gold as Flight 762 began its descent into New York. The cabin, weary from a night of tension, seemed to hold its breath. Every passenger knew the landing would not mark the end of this ordeal, but the beginning of something larger. Amara Collins sat upright, her daughter Leah still curled against her side. The child's sleep had been restless, but now she lay quiet, comforted by the steady rise and fall of her mother's breathing. Amara's eyes were fixed on the faint light beyond the oval window. She had spent the night holding back a storm, and though her voice had never risen, her resolve had only sharpened. The memory of the slap still burned faintly on her cheek. Though the mark was invisible, what remained visible, however, was the collective awareness of every passenger who had witnessed it. They knew, they had seen, and some had even captured the truth. Ethan Brooks glanced down at his phone once more, checking the video that had already begun to circulate online. Notifications had flooded in all night shares, comments, messages. The footage had found its way beyond the cabin before they even touched the ground. The world outside was already waiting. Sophie Nguyen adjusted her uniform as she walked the aisle for landing checks. Her hands still trembled, but there was a steadiness to her step now. She had chosen her side. She had chosen truth. When her eyes met Amara's, she offered the smallest nod, as if to say, "I am with you," in the crew rest area. Victoria Hale sat stiff and silent, her face pale, her lips pressed into a hard line. Her calls during the night had gone unanswered by the supervisors she thought would protect her. The tide had shifted, and she felt it pressing down. Fear gnawed at the edges of her pride, but still, anger smoldered underneath. She could not fathom how everything had unraveled so quickly. The landing gear thudded into place, and the plane shuddered as it began its final descent. Leah stirred awake, blinking up at her mother. "Mommy, are we home?" Amara pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "We're landing, baby. Almost there." The announcement came from Captain Torres, calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be touching down in New York shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But calm words could not erase the weight that hung in the air. Every passenger knew this landing was unlike any other. The tires screeched against the runway, and with a lurch, the plane slowed, the city skyline rising in the distance. A hush swept the cabin as the plane taxied toward the gate. Then came the voice of Captain Torres again, this time firmer. "Please remain seated until instructed. Security will be boarding the aircraft." Gasps and murmurs spread instantly. Passengers exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some grim. They understood this would not be quietly handled. The jet bridge locked in place, and within minutes, uniformed airport security officers entered the cabin. Their presence was calm, professional, but undeniably serious. One stepped forward, addressing the passengers. "We are here regarding an incident reported on this flight. Thank you for your cooperation." Ethan tightened his grip on his phone. Passengers turned, some whispering, others nodding knowingly toward Amara's row. The silence became directional, every gaze shifting, every awareness centering on the woman who had remained calm through it all. Amara did not flinch. She stroked Leah's hair, whispering softly, "Stay close to me, baby." Her voice carried no fear, only steadiness. The lead officer moved to Victoria Hale first. "Miss Hale, you'll need to come with us." Victoria's eyes widened, her breath catching. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding. She provoked me, but the officer cut her off. Passengers, video evidence, and crew testimony tell us otherwise. Please stand." Victoria looked around desperately, but no support came. Even her colleagues avoided her gaze. She rose, her movements stiff, her voice breaking. "This isn't fair." The words hung hollow in the cabin. Fairness had long ago fled her actions. As she was escorted down the aisle, some passengers shook their heads. Others whispered. Ethan captured it all quietly, the lens steady, the story still unfolding. Once Victoria was gone, the lead officer turned to Amara. His tone softened. "Mrs. Collins, are you all right? Do you wish to press charges?" The cabin held its breath. Passengers leaned in, waiting to hear her response. Amara looked at him, her eyes calm but carrying the weight of something larger than herself. "Yes," she said softly, "but not just for me. For every passenger who has ever been treated as less because of who they are. This is bigger than one slap. It's about dignity." Her words settled into the air like a stone cast into still water, the ripples touching every soul in the cabin. Leah tugged her mother's sleeve, whispering, "What does dignity mean?" Amara smiled faintly, brushing her cheek. "It means knowing you deserve respect, no matter what anyone else says. Passengers nodded quietly, some with tears in their eyes. Ethan swallowed hard, realizing his video would carry not just outrage, but truth spoken in a way that could not be ignored. Security escorted Victoria off the plane, but the real weight of the moment rested on Amara. She had not raised her voice, had not shouted, had not let anger dictate her actions. And yet, in her silence, in her measured words, she had reshaped the story. The officers offered to escort Amara and Leah off the plane first, but she shook her head gently. "We'll wait. Others can go ahead." The humility of the choice struck the passengers even harder than any declaration of status could. They didn't yet know who she truly was, the billionaire who owned more of this airline than anyone in the room could imagine. But they felt it. They felt the weight of her presence, the authority in her calm, the dignity she refused to surrender. As passengers filed out, some paused to thank her quietly, to nod with respect, to whisper words of solidarity. "You were brave. You showed strength. You reminded us what matters." Amara accepted each with a nod, her daughter's small hand held tight in her own. When she finally stepped off the plane, the terminal beyond was buzzing with movement security officers, airline officials, even a small crowd of waiting media who had already caught whispers of what had happened. Ethan followed close behind, his phone heavy in his hand. He knew this story would break wide open within hours. But for Amara Collins, this wasn't just a story. It was a reckoning, and it was only just beginning. The terminal was alive with restless movement as passengers streamed out of Flight 762. Whispers filled the air, phones lifted like 1,000 tiny lanterns catching moments before they slipped away. The overnight incident was no longer contained to a single cabin in the sky. It had spilled into the world beyond, drawing eyes and ears hungry for truth. Amara Collins stepped into the terminal, holding Leah's hand. Her daughter's small fingers curled tightly around hers, the grip of a child clinging to security. Amara's face was composed, her stride steady, but within her she carried a quiet heaviness. She had weathered humiliation, violence, and the scrutiny of strangers. Now she faced something new: exposure. Ethan Brooks hovered nearby, protective without overstepping. He knew his video had already found its way online, gathering speed like a wave cresting higher with each passing minute. He could see people in the terminal glancing at their screens, then back at Amara, their eyes widening as recognition dawned. Leah tugged her mother's sleeve, her voice soft. "Mommy, why are people looking at us?" Amara bent slightly, her answer gentle but deliberate. "Because the truth has a way of drawing eyes, baby. But remember, being seen is not the same as being judged." We walk with our heads high. The airport security officers flanked them discreetly, ushering them toward a private lounge where airline executives were waiting. Among them stood a tall man in a sharp suit, his silver hair catching the terminal lights. His name was Daniel Mercer, Liberty Air's Director of Operations. His expression was practiced calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. "Miss Collins," he greeted, his voice polished. "I want to personally apologize for the events of this flight. What you endured was unacceptable, and Liberty Air will be addressing it immediately." Amara regarded him steadily. "An apology is words. I am more interested in actions." Mercer inclined his head. "And you shall have them. The attendant responsible has already been removed from duty. Further, an internal review has been launched. We are committed to ensuring this never happens again. Ethan, unable to hold back, spoke from behind her. "With respect, sir." This wasn't just one attendant. Everyone saw it. The way she was treated started long before that slap. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. Mercer's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to Amara. "I understand your concern, but Mrs. Collins, surely you recognize how complex these matters are." Amara cut him off with a quiet finality. Complexity is not an excuse for injustice. The room fell silent. Leah looked up at her mother with wide eyes, sensing the gravity in her tone. Ethan, standing to the side, felt a ripple of respect. Mercer cleared his throat, attempting to recover. "We value all of our passengers equally, and we hope to retain your trust." Amara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, one that carried no warmth. "You already have more of my trust than you realize. Mr. Mercer, Liberty Air is not merely an airline I chose to fly. It is an airline I helped build." Her words struck like a thunderclap. For the first time, the polished veneer cracked on Mercer's face. He blinked, his composure faltering. "I pardon." Ethan's eyes widened, realization sparking. Amara straightened, her presence filling the room. "My company, Collins Aerotech, owns 15% of Liberty Air's infrastructure contracts. We design and maintain critical systems you rely on: daily scheduling, logistics, compliance oversight. Without us, your operations would collapse within hours." The executive stiffened. Murmurs ran through the small crowd of officials who had gathered, their expressions shifting from control to alarm. Mercer swallowed hard, his voice thinner now. I wasn't aware." "You weren't supposed to be," Amara replied calmly. "I built Collins Aerotech with the intention of solving problems, not flaunting power. But tonight, power was forced into the light." The room shifted as her words sank in. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The single mother who had endured a slap in silence was, in truth, the billionaire whose name carried weight in boardrooms and government contracts alike. Leah looked around, confused by the adults' stunned faces. She tugged her mother's sleeve again. "Mommy, why are they surprised?" Amara crouched, smoothing her daughter's curls. "Because sometimes people see only what they expect to see. Baby. And when truth breaks their expectation, they don't know what to do." Her voice, tender yet firm, carried more power than any declaration of wealth ever could. Mercer recovered enough to speak, though his words came halting. "Mrs. Collins Amara, please understand, Liberty Air takes these matters seriously. We will follow your lead in resolving this situation." Ethan watched, almost holding his breath. He had filmed a slap, but what he witnessed now was something larger, the unveiling of power not wielded in anger, but revealed with dignity. Amara rose to her full height again, her expression calm, her presence undeniable. "Then here is my lead. Mr. Meatpoof, Mercer. Not silence, not settlement. Reform, public acknowledgement, independent oversight, and training that goes deeper than empty slogans. If Liberty Air wishes to regain trust, not just mine, but the public's, you will show it through actions that last." Silence followed, heavy with recognition. Mercer nodded stiffly, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. "It will be done." Amara gathered Leah into her arms. The child resting her head on her shoulder, she turned toward Ethan, who still stood at the edge of the room, his phone clutched like a talisman. "Mr. Brooks," she said gently, "you've carried the truth this far. Be careful with it. Stories can build, or they can burn." Ethan's throat tightened. "I'll honor it," he promised, and in that moment, As dawn spilled fuller across the terminal windows, the story of Flight 762 shifted from a private injustice to a public reckoning. What had begun as a slap, meant to demean a single mother, had now become the spark of something far larger and unveiling, a demand for dignity and a call for change. By the time Amara Collins stepped into the black sedan waiting outside JFK's private terminal, the world already knew. Ethan Brooks's video had gone viral overnight, and by morning, every major news outlet carried the headline, "Flight Attendant Slaps Black Mother in First-Class Passenger Revealed as Billionaire CEO." Inside the car, Leah dozed against her mother's arm, her small body exhausted from the chaos of the night. Amara gazed out the window as New York's skyline shimmered under the rising sun. She felt the weight of what was coming, not just the inquiries, the lawsuits, or the inevitable media storm, but the responsibility of shaping what this moment could become. Her phone vibrated. She picked it up, seeing dozens of messages from her executive team. One stood out from her COO, Angela Moore's press conference scheduled at noon. Media already circling. All eyes on you. Amara typed a brief reply. Prepare the statement. But remember, this isn't about power. It's about people. Ethan's video was replaying on every screen in the city. But what captured hearts was not just the slap. It was her reaction afterward, the calm refusal to bow. The quiet words of dignity. The way she comforted Leah instead of retaliating. Viewers weren't just outraged. They were inspired. By mid-morning, Amara stood at a podium in Liberty Air's headquarters. A sea of cameras pointed at her. Executives flanked the stage, stiff and uneasy, while employees lined the back walls, their eyes darting between curiosity and shame. Amara wore no jewelry, no flash of wealth, only a simple navy dress, her posture tall, her face serene. She waited for the murmurs to quiet before speaking. What happened aboard Flight 762 should never happen to any passenger, she began, her voice measured, carrying without force. No one should fear humiliation or harm when they have done nothing more than take their rightful seat. The room was silent, the weight of her words cutting through the haze of cameras. This is not about me, she continued, glancing briefly at Leah seated in the front row. It is about what happens when silence is chosen over justice, when cruelty is excused as policy, when dignity is treated as optional. I was struck last night. But the truth is, millions are struck in smaller ways, everyday ways that don't go viral, ways that leave no mark but wound just the same. Reporters scribbled furiously. A few executives shifted uncomfortably, aware that her words pierced beyond a single scandal and into the heart of systemic failings. Amara pressed her hands lightly on the podium. I built Collins Aerotech to solve problems others called impossible. Today, I will use that same commitment here. Liberty Air will undergo sweeping reform, independent oversight of passenger treatment, mandatory anti-bias training not once but quarterly, a transparent complaint system that cannot be buried by managers, and accountability that starts from the top. Daniel Mercer, standing just behind her, inclined his head in solemn agreement. He had little choice. Amara's presence had already seized the public's faith more than any executive statement could. I am not interested in apologies that fade with headlines, Amara said firmly. I am interested in change that lasts. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then a reporter shouted from the front, Mrs. Collins, will you press charges against the attendant who struck you? Amara's eyes softened, though her voice remained clear. The law will decide her case, But my charge is against a culture that allowed her to believe she could act that way without consequence. That is where the real work begins." The room erupted in applause, not polite claps, but genuine, rising waves of sound that filled the air with something electric. Leah clapped too, her small hands echoing louder than anyone else's in Amara's ears. Ethan stood near the back, phone lowered for once, his chest tight with admiration. He had expected a story of outrage. Instead, he witnessed a movement being born. That evening, social media overflowed with clips of Amara's speech. Hashtags like "call dignity," "first" and "respect" in the skies trended worldwide. Strangers shared their own stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or disrespected while traveling. For the first time in its history, Liberty Air wasn't just facing scandal, it was facing transformation. At home that night, Amara tucked Leah into bed. The little girl, sleepy but curious, looked up at her. "Mommy, did we win?" Amara smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's curls. "We didn't win, baby. We started, and sometimes starting is the bravest part." Leah's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing slowing. Amara lingered, watching her daughter drift into peace, then stepped into the quiet of her study. She stood by the window, the city lights glittering below, and allowed herself a long breath. Her cheek no longer ached. What remained was the deeper imprint of the night, the certainty that pain, when met with dignity, could be transformed into power, not the kind that crushes, but the kind that lifts. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unknown number. It read, "Your calm changed me. Thank you for reminding us that silence can speak louder than anger. A passenger from 14C." Amara closed her eyes, a quiet smile touching her lips. Change had begun, not in boardrooms, not in contracts, but in hearts. And she knew, as the city pulsed beneath her, that this was only the beginning of a movement that would not be silenced. The next morning, New York awoke to headlines that seemed to blanket every newsstand, every feed, every television screen. Amara Collins, the billionaire who stood calm after the slap, heard around the world. The footage was unavoidable. Clips played on breakfast shows and evening broadcasts alike. Commentators debated not just the act itself, but the composure that followed it. Civil rights leaders praised Amara for embodying strength without anger. Social justice advocates seized the moment, calling for broader reforms in the airline industry. Ordinary people, commuters, and parents left comments online. "She stood the way I wish I could have." Inside Collins Aerotech headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Employees gathered around monitors in the open-floor office, watching their CEO's press conference replay. For many, this was the first time they saw her outside the language of contracts and quarterly reports. Now, they saw her as more than a leader. They saw her as a woman who carried dignity, not just in the boardroom, but in the face of humiliation. Angela Morris, Amara's COO, walked into her office carrying a folder thick with reports. "The response is overwhelming," she said, setting the file on the desk. "We've had over 300 partnership inquiries since yesterday, not to mention letters of support. People want to align with what you stand for." Amara looked up from the window, where she had been gazing at the skyline. "And what do I stand for?" Angela smiled faintly. "Dignity, accountability, justice." She paused, her expression softening. "And hope, especially hope." Amara's eyes drifted back to the horizon. Hope. The word felt heavier than contracts or revenue, yet more essential than either. Later that afternoon, Amara met with Liberty Air's board, The room was crowded with executives, their faces taut with anxiety. Daniel Mercer, usually poised, looked worn from sleepless hours. "Mrs. Collins," he began, "we have drafted a plan to implement the reforms you outlined. Independent oversight, quarterly training, transparent reporting were committed. We're also prepared to announce a partnership with Collins Aerotech to oversee compliance directly." Amara listened, her hands folded neatly on the table. "That is the beginning. But remember, real change is not paperwork. It is culture. If your people fear accountability more than they value respect, then nothing will shift." One board member cleared his throat nervously. "Forgive me, Mrs. Collins, but do you intend to remain public in this? Your presence could invite scrutiny we may not be ready for." Amara's gaze settled on him, calm but unyielding. "Scrutiny is not the enemy. Silence is, and I will not be silent." The boardroom fell quiet. No one dared argue. That evening, Amara returned home, slipping off her heels by the door. Leah bounded down the hallway, her curls bouncing, her laughter breaking the heaviness of the day. "Mommy won't. Look what I drew at school," she exclaimed, waving a picture of an airplane colored in bright crayon shades. Amara knelt, pulling her daughter close. "It's beautiful, baby, just like you." Leah tilted her head. "Everyone at school was talking about you. They said you're a hero." Amara's throat tightened, but she smiled gently. "I'm just your mom. That's the most important thing I'll ever be. Still," when Leah hugged her tightly and whispered, "I wasn't scared when you were there." Amara felt the truth settle deep. The calm she had carried on that flight was not for the cameras, not for the headlines. It was for this child, for this moment. But the ripples were larger than she imagined. In the weeks that followed, Liberty Air announced sweeping reforms. Airlines across the country scrambled to issue their own pledges. A congressional committee invited Amara to testify about dignity in transportation, not because of her wealth, but because of her lived experience. She accepted, knowing that her words could widen the circle of accountability. Victoria Hale's trial moved forward quickly. Footage, testimonies, and Sophie Nguyen's recording sealed the case. While some clamored for vengeance, Amara never once mentioned her name again. "Justice is not humiliation," she said when asked. "It is correction." Sophie, once timid, found herself promoted within Liberty Air. She sent Amara a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me that silence is not safety. You gave me courage." Ethan Brooks, who had gone from anonymous passenger to reluctant public figure, was invited onto talk shows. "He always said the same thing, I just held the camera." She held the dignity. Amara watched his interviews quietly from her living room. Leah curled against her side. She never sought to control the narrative. She let the truth speak for itself. But in her private moments, she reflected on the sting of that slap, on the faces that watched, on the knowledge that what began as humiliation had become transformation. She understood now that dignity was not just something you carried, it was something you ignited in others. And once ignited, it spread like fire. Late one night, Amara stood again by her window, the city alive beneath her. Angela had gone home. Leah was asleep. The office was quiet. Her reflection gazed back at her, calm and strong. She whispered into the glass, not for the world, not for the cameras, but for herself. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning, and deep inside, she knew what had happened on Flight 762 would not fade into memory. It had become something larger, a movement born not from anger, but from composure, from restraint, from the undeniable truth that respect is not a privilege, but a right. Winter settled over New York with its sharp winds and bright lights. Months had passed since the night on Flight 762, yet the memory of it lingered in every corner of public conversation. For Amara Collins, life had not returned to what it was before it had grown, stretched, become something different. What had once been a moment of humiliation had turned into a platform for something greater. On an early December morning, Amara prepared Leah for school. The little girl sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs while carefully zipping her backpack. "Mommy," Leah asked, "are you going to the big meeting today?" Amara smiled. "Yes, baby. Today I talk with other people about making sure airplanes are safe, not just with seatbelts and engines, but with kindness too." Leah tilted her head. Considering this, kindness is safer than seatbelts. Amara chuckled softly. Both matter, but sometimes kindness keeps us from breaking in places no seatbelt can protect. Later that morning, Amara entered a congressional chamber filled with senators, advocates, and reporters. It was her second appearance before the committee, this time not just as a witness, but as a partner in drafting new federal guidelines for passenger dignity. Behind her sat Angela Morris, calm as always, and Sophie Nguyen, now wearing the confident uniform of a lead training officer for Liberty Air. The room buzzed as Amara adjusted the microphone. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I did not ask to be in this position. I did not ask to be struck in front of my child. But I accept that it happened because it revealed something we all need to confront, that too many passengers still fear not turbulence or delays, but disrespect." Her words struck the chamber with the same quiet force she carried on the plane. She outlined practical reforms, not lofty speeches, independent auditors, whistleblower protections, penalties for discriminatory behavior, incentives for staff who demonstrated empathy under pressure. By the time she finished, the chamber was silent. Even those inclined to argue found themselves without rebuttal. Respect was not partisan, not negotiable. That evening, when Amara returned home, she found a package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a letter and a small pin shaped like a pair of wings. The letter was from Captain Michael Torres. "These wings belonged to my father, who flew commercial jets before me. I give them to you not because you need them, but because you have shown the world what true leadership looks like, not in the cockpit, but in the courage to hold us all accountable." Amara held the wings in her palm, her eyes moistening. She placed them in a small glass box on her bookshelf, where Leah could one day see them and understand the weight they carried. The movement continued to ripple outward. Other airlines adopted reforms, some reluctantly, some with genuine conviction. Training programs once dismissed as political correctness were reframed as professional standards. Travelers began to speak up more, recording, reporting, refusing to accept humiliation as part of flying. Ethan Brooks, who once felt awkward about holding a camera, became a respected journalist specializing in transportation equity. In his first feature article, he wrote, "It wasn't the slap that changed the world. It was the calm that followed it." Victoria Hale's trial concluded quietly compared to the storm that began it. She received her sentence community service, fines, and mandatory counseling. Outside the courthouse, she gave a brief statement, eyes lowered. "I was wrong. I let my prejudice blind me. I will spend my days making amends." Few believed her at first, but Amara, when asked for comment, simply said, "Redemption is possible, but it is not mine to grant. It is hers to earn." In private moments, Amara still wrestled with her own emotions. There were nights she woke from dreams of that sharp sting, the startled gasp from Leah. She would walk to her daughter's room, watching her sleep, reminding herself that healing was not linear but layered. Calm had been her shield, but courage was her compass, guiding her forward. On New Year's Eve, Amara stood at a podium once more, this time at a charity gala hosted by Collins Aerotech. The hall glittered with chandeliers and champagne. Yet Amara's words were not about wealth. They were about worth. "Power is not the ability to punish," she said to the gathered crowd. "It is the ability to protect. I have learned that dignity is not a gift we grant. It is a right we must respect. And tonight, as we celebrate progress, let us remember that every journey still begins with one choice to see one another fully." The audience rose to their feet, applause rising like thunder. Leah, in a small dress with a bow at the back, clapped along with everyone else, her smile as bright as the lights above. Later, as the countdown to midnight filled the hall, Amara lifted her daughter into her arms. Fireworks lit the sky outside, and Leah whispered in her ear, "Mommy, this year will be better, won't it?" Amara kissed her cheek. "Yes, baby, better, because we'll make it so." When the clock struck 12, the new year began, not just with celebration, but with a quiet promise one carried by a mother who had been struck but not broken, who had turned humiliation into transformation, and who now stood as proof that dignity, once defended, could ripple far beyond a single flight. And as the world cheered, Amara Collins knew her legacy was not in the billions she earned, but in the billions of moments she had inspired, moments where people chose respect over silence, courage over fear, and hope over despair. Life gives us moments that test who we are, moments when we are hurt, humiliated, or misunderstood. Amara's story reminds us that dignity is not something others give. It's something we choose to keep. In a world that often rewards loudness and anger, her calm became her strength. Her silence spoke of control. Her forgiveness revealed power. And her demand for accountability, not vengeance, sparked change across an entire system. For older viewers who've seen both injustice and resilience, this story echoes a simple truth. Respect must be taught by example. When we face cruelty with grace, we don't just protect ourselves, we inspire others to do the same. The legacy of kindness, composure, and justice will always outlast the noise of cruelty. No matter your age, position, or wealth. Remember, every act of dignity leaves a mark deeper than revenge ever could. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that speak to courage, justice, and the quiet power of humanity. Every share spreads awareness. Every subscription builds a community of compassion. Thank you for being here. Stay kind. Stay strong. And remember, sometimes the calmest voices change the world the most.